In this video, I'm going to show you how to change the rear rotors and brake pads on a Pontiac G6. Now, unlike many things on cars, this will actually apply to most cars with rear disc brakes. Very, very similar, especially pushing the caliper back in, etc. Same type of procedures, so this will work on most cars. First thing to do is jack the car up. Now, the normal jack point is under the rear door. You can look at that in the manual. This is a little rusty under there, so I just went under the control arm under the wheel. It's always smart to use a jack stand. I'm not, but I'm going to put the wheel and tire under the car on that jack point under the rear door basically, and that will support the car if it happens to fall. I'm using an impact wrench, which is making quick work of these lug nuts. These were not on there very tight. Whoever worked on this car last did not tighten the lug nuts very tight. Now, most people don't have an impact wrench, so you'll either be using a 4-way or the bar that came with your car. Once you get the lug nuts off, you just pull the wheel off and then stick it under the rear door. You're probably gonna have to jack the car up a little bit more, maybe. If not, if you can't get it under there, use a jack stand for sure. It's the safest way. One of the first things you want to do with any brake job, definitely get yourself some brake cleaner. Just spray the whole thing down because you got all this brake dust around there. You don't want to breathe this stuff in. It's kind of toxic. So there's 2 bolts that hold the caliper on basically every car. On this car, the socket size happens to be 14 millimeter. And this broke loose super easy. What happened, someone must have worked on this and just stuck some brake pads on this nasty rotor, and it all came off pretty easy. I'll show you a better angle coming up here of this caliper and these bolts. Oops, trying to turn it the wrong way, dummy. Gotta go the other way. There we go. Oh, wait. There it is. I'm not tightening stuff very good. So you heard me say it. I'm like, man, this stuff is not tight at all. It really wasn't. I've never encountered caliper bolts and stuff that came apart that easy. And now you can just slide the caliper right off. Sometimes, like with this crappy rotor, it might be a little sticky, but well, actually it came right off. And the brake pads will be sitting right in there. Ah. Someone put some brake pads on it. So now most people tell you want to tie up the caliper, etc., so you don't pull the line. Well, these rear ones especially happen to be attached to the emergency brake cable, and that's pretty tough. It's literally a steel cable, so if you let it hang by that, you're all right. Someone that put some brake pads on this and didn't do the rotors, you can see those are pretty much new brake pads. It didn't make a difference. Still bad rotor. Still made a lot of noise. Did not work very well. Just so you can see better, the 2 bolts on the caliper were this one and this one. We removed from there and there. Now to get the rotor off, all we gotta do is remove the caliper bracket, which is these 2 13 millimeters. The actual caliper bolts were 14 millimeter socket size, and then the bracket ones are 13 back here. This one and this one down here. Pretty simple. Now, obviously, since no one's changed the rotor on here, they didn't remove this bracket, so these bolts are a little tougher. I don't think this one was too bad. Yeah, it broke loose relatively easy. I was putting some effort into that, though. If you can get a breaker bar in there, get a breaker bar. If you can't, sometimes you can just whack on your socket wrench with a hammer. But if you have a cheap socket wrench, you can break that. You can possibly break your socket if they're cheap. So, do what you gotta do. Now once you get the 2 bolts out, these caliper brackets just slide right off. And so does the rotor, except some import cars particularly will have 2 little Phillips screws that'll just hold the rotor on kinda, and you'll need to remove those. Those can be tough sometimes, and you don't need to put them back in. Now, installing the new rotor is simply a matter of getting the new rotor, acquiring 1 or 2, and sliding it back on. And look at me, I was like, dang, that doesn't look smooth. I gotta start over and line the holes up so it makes me look smooth, so I didn't get it on the first time. But there I go. You want to stick a lug nut or 2 on here, at least 1, just to hold the rotor in place, where it should be, so it's not all crooked and stuff when you're trying to put the rest of the brakes back together. Now just putting the brake caliper bracket back on. Slides right over the rotor, put the 2 bolts back in. Now once you do that, probably what people consider the toughest part of this job is getting your caliper piston back in. Now this is a tool I actually just rented from AutoZone, free rental. Well, you leave them $60 or whatever, they give it back to you. It's got just 2 little freaking pins in the end, and you stick it in there and you push on it and turn it clockwise. And that's why rear calipers differ from front ones, because they have the emergency brake. It's like a ratcheting mechanism, so they got to spin as they go in, so you can't use just a C-clamp or something. So I was just doubly checking that this caliper piston was going back in all the way. Now this one wasn't sticking out that far because someone had stuck some brake pads on it, so it was pretty easy actually. And that's all the further it goes in right there. Now you can put your new brake pads in. They just slide into that caliper bracket. Pretty straightforward. Usually you get a set of 4 brake pads, okay, front or rear, whatever, and you'll get 2 with a little squealer thing on it. It's like a little metal piece attached to it, metal tab. Usually that will go on the inside, and then usually it's just as simple as sliding your caliper back over these new brake pads and putting the 2 bolts in, and you're good to go, right? Well, I was having an issue here, and turned out what my issue was. I was checking the slide pin right there. I'm like, okay, well it's greased up pretty good. It's actually sliding just fine. The top pin on that bracket where the other bolt goes in was not going in. It's not really a slide pin like that bottom one is. It's just kind of, it moves a little bit, but they're different. I don't really know, honestly. But what I know to do is pound that in, because you can see what's going on here. I can't get the caliper to fit over it. Even though the piston's in all the way, it's not going right. What it is that friggin' other so-called slide pin on that caliper bracket is not going in. And when I did the other side, I just literally just took a hammer to it and made sure it was pounded in all the way while the caliper bracket was off. Now you can see even some of my woes here. The thing got wedged on there. I had to get a hammer out just to pound the caliper back off. All because of that stupid little slider on the top of the bracket. So at this point I was trying to figure out still exactly what the heck is happening here, because that top slider on that caliper bracket is not sliding easy at all. Neither of them did. They were both frozen. I had to whip out the hammer and pound them in. So I actually stopped filming there, but like I said, all goes back together just the way it came apart. 2 bolts back in your caliper. Once you get that thing pounded in like I did, and just put it back together the way it came apart.